So it appears that Mitch McDoucheface is offering a threat. He's essentially levying a threat, a warning, because there's talks right now going on about filibuster reform. Now, if you don't know what a filibuster is, it just means to block a piece of legislation. And so, in order to exit debate currently under regular rules, you need 60 votes just to get to a vote, just to get cloture to get into a vote. And that's very hard to do. So all that means is if you don't have 60 people to vote on something, you can't pass anything. And it's pretty hard to get to that 60 vote threshold. And so people are saying, well, should we just completely remove the filibuster? Another thing people are saying is, should we change the filibuster so it's a talking filibuster? And I'm okay with either of those, honestly. A talking filibuster would completely change the game, obviously, because you can only talk for so long, right? The famous filibusters you see are when, Bernie Sanders was there for like 15 hours or something like that. They're just reading like random shit or whatever to basically stall. But filibuster reform is pretty important, and the filibuster is kind of a Jim Crow relic. It was really heavy in its impact in terms of preventing civil rights legislation and things of that nature. I know that LBJ had to, get 60 votes to get the Civil Rights Act of 1965 through. Here's what it says. The Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell offered a scathing warning to Democrats on Tuesday amid growing pressure to nix the legislative filibuster. Let me say this very clearly for all 99 of my colleagues. Nobody serving in this chamber can even begin to imagine what a completely scorched earth Senate would look like, McConnell said. He added that in a chamber that functions on a day-to-day basis by consent, meaning all senators sign off on an action, I want our colleagues to imagine a world where every single task, every one of them, requires a physical quorum. McConnell's remarks come a day after Senator Dick Durbin, the number 2 Senate Democrat, offered a scorching rebuke of the 60-vote legislative filibuster, comparing it to a weapon of mass destruction that was holding the Senate hostage. Nixing the legislative filibuster, reverting it back to a talking filibuster, which would force senators to physically be on the floor, has momentum both with outside groups and Democratic senators. But Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer hasn't tipped his hand on if he supports it, and Democrats currently don't have the votes to invoke the nuclear option to get rid of the filibuster on a party line vote. Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are both on the record opposing it, and others viewed as wary. But supporters of invoking the rules change argue that with the 60-vote legislative filibuster in place, many of Biden's big campaign promises are DOA in the Senate because they need support of 10 GOP senators. And that's absolutely true. So, not getting the $15 minimum wage through on budget reconciliation, if you're trying to get it through on regular, you'd need 10 GOP senators just to get out of debate, which is impossible. It's not going to happen. It says McConnell warned that nixing the filibuster wouldn't result in a fast track for Biden's agenda, but instead would spark more gridlock with Republicans, vowing to cause big headaches for Democrats on even the most mundane Senate tasks. So this is not a trade-off between trampling etiquette, but then getting to quickly transform the country. That's a false choice. Even the most basic aspects of our colleagues' agenda, the most mundane task of the Biden presidency, would actually be harder, not easier, McConnell said. This chaos would not open up an express lane to liberal change. It would not open up an express lane for the Biden presidency to speed into the history books. The Senate would be more like a 100-car pileup, nothing moving. And so basically, he says, but in a warning shot to Democrats, he outlined a laundry list of conservative policies that could pass the next time Republicans control the chamber: defunding Planned Parenthood in so-called sanctuary cities, anti-abortion legislation, and nationwide concealed carry reciprocity. So the pendulum would swing both ways, and it would swing hard. So what Mitch McConnell is doing here is he's offering a multi-faceted warning. One of the warnings is, if you are to get rid of the filibuster, we're going to make it hard just to even do basic tasks, is what he's saying. Going to eat up time. If you saw what Marjorie Taylor Greene was doing in the House, she was trolling them by basically continuing to do these motions to adjourn. A motion to adjourn means to close the session and push whatever you're doing to a later on point. But it's not easy to get through those votes. Those votes take like 45 minutes at least. And so that is a lot of time. That's, a lot of time. I think our, elected officials need to work more. So, if they want to do that stuff, let's see. I mean, Mitch McConnell's like 5,000 years old. He looks like a piece of shit. He is a piece of shit. Let's see how long he can hold up in the 100-car Senate. But he's also saying, when the Republicans get back the Senate, imagine what we're gonna do. So you can't be afraid of Mitch McConnell. It's sad that Democrats are even in a position to be on the receiving end of this, warning of a scorched earth filibuster, scorched earth Senate. You can't be a bitch in this situation. You have to fight back, essentially. You have to be the aggressor. But what I want to talk about, honestly, is the fact that the Senate is incredibly undemocratic. It's entirely undemocratic because it's not population based. So a state like Wyoming has like 500K people. California's got 35 million. They've both got 2 senators. Let that sink in your mind how incredibly undemocratic that is. Now, the history of the government being decided was a compromise to have this bicameral legislative branch, and the lower chamber is the House. It's fully populous, essentially population based. The upper chamber is everyone's equal. It's absolutely fucking insane. So there has to be some kind of Senate reform for any progressive real legislation to get through. Now, some of the weaker ones would be like adding DC as a state. That would give it 2 senators that almost certainly be Democratic, so that would be pretty big. When you're talking about other ones, I would say more fundamental reform would be changing the way that the Senate really works in terms of, okay, it's not 2 senators per state, but rather somewhere in the middle between being entirely population-based and the way that the Senate works currently. So it wouldn't be completely population-based. It would be somewhere in the middle. And that's what I'm really in favor of. But something like making D.C. a state would definitely be helpful, but it wouldn't be fundamental change. Because otherwise, the Senate, it's so hard for Democrats to win back because it's so, it's not, it's just not population-based. It's not democratic. It's really disgusting, the institution of the Senate. But it also holds Democrats back a lot. There's a lot of gerrymandering that goes on in House races. There's a lot of ways to, quash a bunch of people of one political ideology into one district. That's obviously what one of the tactics of gerrymandering. But in a state, in a lot of states, you'll typically have enough people in urban areas to sort of outnumber Republicans in the other areas. And right now we're in a situation where it's minority rule. You know what I mean? Like democracy is now, we have a constitution, but it's a minority is ruling right now. So in order to really get anything through, we need to have some serious Senate reform. And I'm hoping that the conversation begins to start at some point, because I think that it's really important and it's very, very necessary for this conversation to begin. But yes, the filibuster needs to be altered, certainly, either to the talking filibuster or for an entire, removal of the filibuster. I'm for both of those things, of course. But yeah, let's see what happens. And honestly, if the Republicans were to pass a lot of that shit that Mitch McConnell's threatening, they're not going to be very popular.